The stars had never seemed so close until humanity finally reached them. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiant and watched the endless black outside the windows. His ship carried 200 people into deep space, farther than any human had ever traveled before. 8 months had passed since they left Earth, and every day brought new discoveries. Jake was a tall man with short dark hair and tired eyes that had seen too many simulations of what could go wrong. He never expected that all those simulations would prove useless when real danger finally arrived. The Defiant was not a warship. It carried scientists, engineers, and explorers who wanted to learn about the universe. Lisa Bennett served as first officer and stood beside Jake on most days. She was sharp and quick to smile, though lately the smiles came less often as the mission dragged on. The crew missed home, missed fresh air that did not come from recyclers, missed the feel of real gravity instead of the artificial spin that kept them on their feet. But they pushed forward because humanity needed to know what waited out here in the dark. Everything changed when the sensors picked up 12 ships approaching. From the edge of the system, Dr. Alan Price rushed to his station and started scanning the vessels. His hands shook as data flowed across his screens. These were not human ships. They were massive, each one 3 times larger than the Defiant. Their hulls gleamed with metal that did not match anything in human databases. After centuries of searching and hoping, humanity had finally found proof that they were not alone in the universe. Jake ordered the crew to stations and opened all communication channels. He broadcast greetings in every language and mathematical sequence that Earth scientists had prepared for this moment. The alien ships did not respond with words. Instead, they surrounded the Defiant in a formation that looked distinctly military. Sophie Turner sat at the pilot controls and watched her screens with growing worry. The alien ships moved with precision that suggested they had done this many times before. Finally, a transmission came through. The voice that spoke was harsh and clicked with sounds no human throat could make. Alan worked frantically to translate while the message played. When the translation appeared on screen, the bridge went silent. The aliens demanded immediate surrender. They wanted all human technology, all data, and all crew members to submit to their authority. They called themselves the Velkari, and claimed this region of space belonged to the Galactic Council. Humans were trespassing and would face consequences unless they obeyed. Jake looked at Lisa and saw his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. They had come in peace, had broken no laws they knew about, and had simply been exploring empty space. Now strangers with overwhelming force demanded they surrender everything, including their freedom. Jake opened the channel again and spoke calmly. He explained that humans meant no harm and requested peaceful dialogue to resolve any misunderstanding. He offered to share information about humanity and learn about the Council in return. His words were diplomatic and reasonable. The Velkari response was immediate and violent. Energy weapons struck the Defiant's shields with force that sent crew members stumbling. Alarms screamed across the ship as systems registered damage. Jake grabbed his chair to stay upright while Sophie's hands flew across her controls. The shields held but barely. The Velkari were not interested in conversation. They wanted dominance, and they expected the small human ship to crumble under their first attack. What the Velkari did not know was that humanity had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing each other. Every war, every conflict, every hard lesson had been built into human military technology, even on exploration vessels. The Defiant carried weapons that Earth governments insisted on including, despite protests from the science teams. Jake had thought those weapons would never be needed. He was wrong. Sophie pushed the Defiant through evasive patterns that made the artificial gravity systems groan. She flew like she was dodging through an asteroid field, which she had trained for extensively back home. The Velkari ships were powerful but slow. Their weapons tracked where the Defiant had been, not where it was going. Alan analyzed the enemy fire and found patterns. He fed that data to the weapons officer, a young woman named Kate Rogers who had top scores in every combat simulation, despite hoping she would never need those skills. Jake made a choice that would change everything. He ordered Kate to return fire. Human weapons were different from what the Velkari expected. Instead of pure energy beams, humans used missiles with adaptive targeting, railguns that fired solid projectiles at incredible speeds, and lasers that pulsed in patterns designed to overwhelm shields. The Defiant was smaller and weaker, but it fought smart. 2 Velkari ships took damage before they adjusted their tactics. Then the Velkari deployed boarding pods. These were small craft designed to latch onto enemy ships and cut through hulls. Jake watched 8 pods launch toward the Defiant and knew what came next. He called Lieutenant Kevin Hayes to the bridge. Kevin commanded the security team, 20 men and women trained in combat. His face was grim when he heard the news. Fighting in space was one thing. Fighting inside their own ship against unknown aliens was another. The Velkari warriors who boarded the Defiant were 4-armed beings with blue skin and natural armor plating. They stood taller than humans and carried weapons that crackled with energy. They moved through the breached sections expecting easy victory over the primitive species that had foolishly resisted. What they found instead was a nightmare they could not have imagined. Human security forces hit them from every angle. Kevin had positioned his teams in defensive positions that maximized their advantages. Humans knew every corridor, every vent, every hiding spot on their own ship. They used that knowledge without mercy. The Velkari were strong but slow in the confined spaces. Humans were smaller, faster, and far more vicious than anything the aliens had encountered before. One Velkari warrior found himself facing 3 humans in a narrow corridor. He raised his weapon confidently, but the humans did not stand still to be shot. They scattered and attacked from 3 directions at once. One slid low and struck at his legs. Another fired from behind equipment he had not noticed. The third threw something that exploded with light and sound, blinding and deafening him. Before he could recover, human hands pulled him down and restraints locked around all 4 arms. His squad leader tried to help but met a similar fate. Throughout the ship, the pattern repeated. Velkari warriors expected honorable combat and found instead humans who fought to win by any means necessary. The humans set traps, used their environment as weapons, and coordinated their attacks with frightening precision. They did not pause to consider honor or glory. They simply fought with the desperate efficiency of a species that had survived countless wars against itself. Kevin led his team deeper into the contested sections and found the Velkari attempting to reach the engine room. If they took control there, the Defiant would be helpless. Kevin could not allow that. His team moved through maintenance passages too small for the larger aliens. They emerged behind the Velkari advance and attacked from the rear. The aliens turned to face this new threat and found themselves caught between 2 human forces with no room to maneuver. The fight was brutal and short. When it ended, the Velkari warriors were either dead or surrendering. Kevin stood among the bodies and felt sick. He had trained for combat but never wanted it to be real. Now he had blood on his hands, even if it was blue alien blood. Around him, his team checked for wounded and secured the prisoners. Nobody celebrated. They had won, but at a cost that would haunt them later. On the bridge, Jake watched his screens as the remaining Velkari boarding pods retreated. The enemy ships pulled back, apparently shocked that their warriors had been defeated. Jake saw an opportunity. He ordered Kate to target the damaged vessels with everything the Defiant had left. Human missiles and railgun fire struck with coordinated precision. 3 Velkari ships went dark, their systems crippled. The others fled, jumping away to faster-than-light speeds that the Defiant could not match. Silence fell over the bridge as the last enemy ship disappeared. Lisa sat down heavily in her chair and let out a breath she had been holding. Sophie's hands trembled on her controls now that the crisis had passed. Alan stared at his screens with wide eyes, unable to process what had just happened. Kate sat at her weapons station with tears running down her face, crying for reasons she could not explain. Jake stood and addressed his crew over the ship-wide communication system. He told them they had survived first contact with an alien species. He told them they had defended themselves and their ship with courage and skill. He told them that 14 crew members had died during the boarding action, and many more were wounded. He told them they were going home to warn Earth that humanity was not alone in the universe, and that the neighbors were hostile. The Defiant began its long journey back to Earth, carrying wounded crew, prisoners, and the bodies of the dead. Jake spent his nights staring at the stars and wondering what he had unleashed. The Velkari had sent a message before fleeing, a transmission that Alan eventually translated. It was a warning to the Galactic Council ABO, a dangerous new species that fought like demons and knew no fear. It was a request for war. The message from the Defiant reached Earth using the experimental quantum communication system that Dr. Alan Price had activated during the battle. The transmission was brief but clear. Humanity had made first contact with aliens, and those aliens had attacked without provocation. Earth's government received the news in stunned silence before the reality set in. Humanity was not alone in the universe, and the neighbors wanted them dead or subjugated. Admiral Frank Carter had seen enough war in his lifetime. He was a gray-haired man with hard eyes and a straight back despite his 60 years. He had commanded naval forces during the last major Earth conflict and thought his fighting days were over. Now he stood before the emergency session of the Global Parliament and delivered an assessment that chilled everyone present. An alien empire spanning the galaxy had declared humanity a threat. They possessed technology far beyond Earth's capabilities and would likely send a fleet to enforce their demands. Earth had weeks or maybe months to prepare for an invasion. President Nicole Hayes listened to Carter's briefing and felt the weight of her office pressing down on her. She had been elected 6 months ago on promises of peace and cooperation among Earth nations. Her campaign had focused on expanding space exploration and improving life on Earth. Now she faced a decision that would determine whether humanity survived as a free species. The vote came quickly. Every nation agreed. Earth would mobilize for total war. Dr. Helen Foster took charge of the weapons development program. She was a physicist who had spent 20 years designing propulsion systems for peaceful spacecraft. Now she gathered every weapons expert, every military engineer, and every scientist who could contribute to the war effort. The Velkari bodies and technology recovered from the Defiant provided crucial information. Helen's team dissected alien weapons, analyzed their armor, and studied their tactics from the battle recordings. What they discovered gave humanity both hope and worry. Human weapons were actually more lethal than Velkari designs. Humanity's long history of warfare had produced incredibly efficient killing tools. The problem was that Velkari shields and armor were far superior to anything Earth possessed. A human bullet could kill a Velkari warrior instantly if it reached flesh, but getting through their defenses was the challenge. Helen's team worked day and night to develop shield technology based on captured alien equipment while improving human weapons to penetrate enemy defenses. General Chris Walker commanded the ground forces training program. He was a broad-shouldered man who had earned his rank through decades of service in multiple combat zones. Chris understood that if aliens managed to board human ships or invade Earth, traditional military tactics might not be enough. He studied the reports from Lieutenant Kevin Hayes and the Defiant security team. The humans had won their shipboard battle through creativity, aggression, and intimate knowledge of their environment. Chris built training programs around those principles. Soldiers from every nation came together to learn new ways of fighting. They trained in mock corridors that simulated alien ships. They practiced combat in low gravity and zero gravity. They learned to use every tool and environmental feature as potential weapons. Chris pushed them hard because he knew the Velkari would not show mercy to those who hesitated or followed predictable patterns. The soldiers complained about the brutal training, but they learned quickly. Fear was a powerful motivator. Captain Jake Morrison and the Defiant arrived at Earth as heroes, though Jake felt nothing like a hero. He had lost 14 crew members in a battle he never wanted to fight. The faces of the dead haunted his dreams. Earth's military wanted to debrief him constantly, asking about every detail of the fight. Jake told them everything he could remember, while Lisa Bennett helped him process the trauma. She had nightmares too, but together they were stronger than they were alone. The industrialization of Earth's orbital space accelerated at a pace that seemed impossible. Shipyards that had taken 20 years to build were duplicated in 4 months. Resources poured into space from every nation. The moon became one giant factory producing weapons and ship components. Mars base transformed from a scientific outpost into a military training ground where soldiers learned to fight in the red planet's low gravity. Every asteroid worth mining was claimed and stripped of useful materials. Sophie Turner found herself training new combat pilots. Her hands-on experience keeping the Defiant alive during the Velkari attack made her invaluable. She taught young pilots to fly like humans rather than trying to match alien precision. Humans had faster reflexes and better spatial awareness thanks to evolving on a planet that constantly tried to kill them. Sophie showed pilots how to use those advantages, developing flight patterns based on instinct rather than calculated precision. The patterns looked chaotic to computers but felt natural to human pilots. Dr. Alan Price led the effort to understand and improve alien faster-than-light travel technology. The Velkari engines were efficient, but relatively slow according to the data recovered from captured systems. Alan's team discovered that human computational methods could optimize the alien drives in ways the Velkari had never considered. Humans were used to squeezing every bit of performance from limited resources. Within 8 months, human ships could match Velkari speeds. 4 months after that, they exceeded them. The ability to move faster than the enemy would prove crucial in the coming war. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Karen Lewis was a biologist who specialized in studying life in extreme environments. She examined the Velkari bodies recovered from the Defiant and made a discovery that changed everything. The Velkari, like most species in the galaxy apparently, had evolved on worlds with lower gravity and less atmospheric pressure than Earth. Their bodies were adapted to gentler environments. They were physically weaker than humans, their bones more fragile, their muscles less dense. Karen presented her findings to the military leadership with growing excitement. Earth was what xenobiologists called a death world. The gravity was crushing by galactic standards. The atmosphere was thick and rich with oxygen that was actually toxic in high concentrations to most potential alien biochemistries. Earth's diseases were nightmarish. Its predators were terrifying. Its weather systems were violent. Humanity had evolved in an environment that would kill most alien species within days. That made humans stronger, tougher, and more adaptable than the galaxy was prepared for. The implications spread through Earth's military like wildfire. Human soldiers could wear heavier armor because they were used to Earth's gravity. They could endure injuries that would incapacitate aliens. Their immune systems could fight off alien diseases while human diseases might devastate alien populations. Even human psychology was shaped by living on a world that offered constant threats. Humans were used to being afraid and fighting anyway. Most alien species had never known such an environment. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of humanity's new flagship, the Liberty. The ship was massive, built from combined Earth resources and incorporating both human and captured alien technology. Around it, 99 other warships waited in formation. Each vessel carried a crew of humans who understood they were heading into the unknown. They might not survive. Many probably would not survive. But they would fight because the alternative was extinction or slavery. The ships represented humanity's desperate gamble. Earth had poured everything into this fleet. If it failed, Earth would be defenseless when the Galactic Council arrived. But if it succeeded, humanity might buy time to build more defenses and prove that attacking Earth came with an unacceptable cost. The fleet's mission was simple: meet the Council forces away from Earth and defeat them so decisively that the aliens would think twice about continuing the war. Meanwhile, intelligence reports suggested the Galactic Council had assembled a war fleet of 500 ships. The force was already traveling toward Earth, confident in their overwhelming numerical superiority. The Council expected to find a frightened primitive world begging for mercy. They anticipated an easy conquest that would serve as an example to other species about the futility of resisting Council authority. They had no idea what was actually waiting for them. Jake Morrison commanded a destroyer squadron now, promoted due to his combat experience. He trained his crews relentlessly, sharing every lesson learned from the first battle. Lisa Bennett commanded her own ship, a cruiser named the Valiant. Kevin Hayes led the Marines aboard the Liberty, ready to board enemy vessels if the opportunity arose. Sophie Turner commanded a fighter squadron that would screen the human fleet. Dr. Price served as the fleet's chief science officer, developing electronic warfare systems based on human hacking techniques. Everyone who had survived the first contact now prepared for a much larger battle. The human fleet completed its preparations and moved out to intercept the Council forces. They chose the area near Jupiter's moon Europa as their battleground. The gas giant's immense gravity well and radiation belts would provide tactical advantages for those who knew how to use them. Human forces had practiced fighting Iweir in that environment. The Council fleet would be encountering it for the first time. Every advantage mattered when facing such overwhelming numbers. Earth held its breath and waited for news. Billions of people watched their screens and prayed to whatever gods they believed in. Families said goodbye to loved ones serving in the fleet, not knowing if they would ever see them again. Children asked questions that parents could not answer. Would the aliens come? Would humanity survive? What would happen to Earth if the fleet failed? Nobody had good answers, only hope and determination. Admiral Carter reviewed the battle plans one final time and allowed himself a moment of doubt. He was sending thousands of people into combat against an enemy that outnumbered them 5-1. Many would die. Some ships would be destroyed. But humanity had no choice. The Council had started this war with their unprovoked attack on the Defiant. Now Earth would finish it one way or another. Carter closed his eyes and thought about his grandchildren back on Earth. They deserved to grow up free. That was worth any sacrifice. The Galactic Council war fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system, exactly where their calculations predicted they would arrive. 500 warships materialized in the black, their hulls gleaming with the confidence of an empire that had never known defeat. High Commander Theron led the fleet from his massive flagship. He was a Zalkiri, an insectoid species that stood 8 feet tall with 4 arms and natural armor plating that shimmered like polished metal. His species had conquered 20 worlds over the centuries, and Theron had personally commanded forces in half of those campaigns. This mission would be simple compared to his previous victories. Theron broadcast the standard surrender demand on all frequencies. He expected the primitive humans to respond with pleas for mercy or perhaps defiant but ultimately meaningless threats. Instead, he received a cold, measured response from someone called Admiral Frank Carter. The human rejected the Council's authority entirely and demanded that the invaders leave immediately or be destroyed. Theron's mandibles clicked together in what his species considered laughter. These primitives actually thought they could threaten a fleet 5 times their size with technology centuries more advanced. The arrogance would be amusing if it were not so pathetic. The Council fleet moved forward in standard formation toward the inner solar system. Their sensors detected the human fleet near Jupiter, clustered around one of the gas giant's moons. Theron examined the tactical display and felt satisfaction. The humans had chosen to make their stand far from their homeworld, which meant Earth would be defenseless once this minor obstacle was cleared. He ordered his fleet to maintain formation and advance at moderate speed. There was no need to rush. The outcome was already decided. What Theron did not know was that humanity had spent every moment since the first attack studying Velkari tactics and preparing for this exact scenario. The human fleet was not clustered around Europa by accident. They had chosen that location with careful calculation, using every advantage their home system could provide. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of the Liberty and watched the enemy approach. His expression revealed nothing, but inside he felt the familiar cold focus that came before combat. He had been here before during Earth's wars, watching a superior enemy advance while preparing to spring a trap. The ambush began when the Council fleet reached the predetermined coordinates. Human ships that had been hiding in Jupiter's massive radiation belts suddenly powered up their engines and burst forth. More vessels appeared from behind Europa and Jupiter's other moons, having used the satellites as cover from enemy sensors. Ships that had been drifting with all systems powered down in the asteroid field suddenly came to life. Within seconds, the Council fleet found itself surrounded by human forces that seemed to materialize from nowhere. Carter gave the order to engage. Human ships moved in patterns that should have been impossible. They accelerated and turned with brutal force that would have injured or killed most alien crews. But humans had evolved in Earth's heavy gravity and could withstand forces that would crush beings from lighter worlds. The pilots pushed their vessels to limits that made their hulls groan, and the crews endured because they had trained specifically for this kind of punishment. Captain Jake Morrison commanded his destroyer squadron on the fleet's left flank. His orders were to target the Council's supply ships and support vessels. The strategy was simple: cripple the enemy's ability to sustain combat operations and force them to either retreat or fight without reserves. Jake's ships darted through the enemy formation like wolves among sheep, their weapons firing in carefully coordinated patterns. Human missiles used erratic flight paths that the alien targeting computers could not predict. Railgun projectiles struck with devastating force, punching through shields that were designed to stop energy weapons but not solid matter, moving at incredible speeds. Lieutenant Kevin Hayes and his Marines prepared to board enemy vessels. The Liberty carried special boarding craft designed for rapid insertion into hostile ships. When a Council cruiser took critical damage and its shields flickered, Kevin's team launched. The boarding craft attached to the alien hull and cut through with tools adapted from captured Velkari technology. The Marines poured into the enemy ship and moved through its corridors with practiced violence. The alien crew tried to resist but found themselves facing opponents who fought without hesitation or mercy. Sophie Turner led her fighter squadron against the Council's command ships. Her mission was to cause chaos in the enemy's leadership structure and disrupt their ability to coordinate. Her fighters were small and fast, using the same unpredictable flight patterns that had kept the Defiant alive during the first battle. She wove through enemy fire with reflexes honed by a lifetime on Earth, where quick reactions meant survival. Her missiles targeted communication arrays and sensor systems, blinding and deafening the massive warships that depended on sophisticated electronics to function. Dr. Alan Price coordinated the electronic warfare assault from the Liberty. Human hackers had spent months studying captured Velkari systems and developing viruses and intrusion programs based on centuries of Earth's cyber conflicts. The Council ships used standardized systems that prioritized efficiency over security because they had never faced an enemy that attacked through computer networks. Within the first hour of battle, human cyber attacks had penetrated over 100 enemy vessels. Targeting systems failed, navigation went offline, and internal communications collapsed. Ships designed to work as a coordinated fleet suddenly found themselves isolated and confused. High Commander Theron watched his tactical display with growing horror. The battle was not proceeding according to any simulation or historical precedent. His ships were being destroyed faster than they could respond. The humans fought without following any civilized rules of engagement. They used the environment as a weapon, driving Council ships into Jupiter's radiation belts where the intense energy played havoc with delicate alien systems. They rammed vessels when their weapons were depleted. They refused to surrender even when hopelessly outnumbered. They seemed to welcome death as much as victory. The battle raged for 6 hours of continuous combat. Human losses mounted steadily. 12 ships were destroyed completely, and 30 more took critical damage. But the Council fleet was being systematically dismantled. For every human ship destroyed, the aliens lost 5. The mathematics of attrition favored humanity despite their smaller numbers because human ships fought smarter and their crews refused to give up even when their vessels were crippled. Then disaster struck the Liberty. A Council battlecruiser managed to break through the human defensive screen and landed a devastating hit directly on the flagship's engine section. The massive explosion tore away a quarter of the ship's hull and crippled its propulsion systems. The Liberty began drifting, unable to maneuver and vulnerable to enemy fire. Admiral Carter assessed the damage and made a decision that would become legendary in both human and alien histories. He ordered all weapons to continue firing and instructed the engineering team to overload the ship's reactor. High Commander Theron saw the crippled flagship and recognized an opportunity. If he could destroy the human command ship, their coordination would collapse and the battle might still be won. He ordered his own flagship to close in for the kill, bringing 8 escort vessels with him. It was exactly what Carter had hoped for. The Liberty's crew had 7 minutes to evacuate before the reactor went critical. Carter made sure every person who could reach an escape pod did so, though he knew some sections of the ship were too damaged for evacuation. The Liberty's reactor reached critical mass just as Theron's flagship moved into close range. The explosion was enormous, a miniature sun that erupted in the black between worlds. Carter and most of his crew made it to the escape pods and jettisoned just seconds before the detonation. 200 humans did not make it out in time, but the sacrifice accomplished its purpose. Theron's flagship was destroyed instantly, along with its 8 escorts, and 4 other Council vessels that had been too close to escape the blast radius, with their supreme commander dead and their fleet in chaos. The Council left. Forces broke. Ship captains made independent decisions to retreat, rather than continue fighting an enemy that seemed to prefer mutual destruction over defeat. 314 Council ships had entered Earth's solar system full of confidence. 147 limped away with severe damage and broken crews. Not a single Council soldier had successfully set foot on a human world or captured a human vessel intact. Captain Lisa Bennett aboard the Valiant coordinated the pursuit of fleeing enemy ships. She wanted to destroy every vessel that retreated, but new orders came from the surviving human command structure. Let them go. Let them carry their stories back to the Council. Let every species in the galaxy hear about what happened when they attacked humanity. Fear would be as valuable a weapon as any missile or railgun. The human fleet regrouped near Europa and began rescue operations. Thousands of crew members floated in space inside escape pods or damaged ship sections. Medical teams worked frantically to save the wounded. Jake Morrison supervised the recovery of survivors from his squadron and felt the familiar numbness that came after combat. 3 of his 5 ships had survived, but every vessel carried dead crew members who would never see Earth again. General Chris Walker received the battle reports from his command post on Mars. The plan now moved to its second phase. The Council had brought war to humanity's doorstep and been defeated. Now humanity would carry the war to them. Captured star charts showed the locations of Council bases and member worlds. Intelligence gathered from prisoners revealed which species had voted for the war and which had opposed it. Earth's forces would strike at the Council's nearest military installations and make it clear that attacking humans came with consequences that extended far beyond a single battle. The survivors of the Council fleet carried their tales of terror back to their homeworlds. They spoke of humans who fought like demons possessed, who laughed at death, who turned their own ships into weapons when nothing else remained. They described vessels that moved in ways that should have killed their crews, and weapons that ignored accepted standards of warfare. They told stories of boarding parties that swept through alien ships like unstoppable nightmares. The Galactic Council had started this war expecting an easy conquest. What they received instead was a lesson in why some species should never be provoked. 3 months after the Battle of Europa, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session on their capital world of Nexus Prime. Representatives from 80 different species gathered in the massive chamber that had been built to celebrate unity and cooperation among the stars. Today, however, the chamber filled with fear and angry voices demanding answers. How had a single primitive species defeated their finest military fleet? How had humanity killed High Commander Theron and destroyed over half of the ships sent to subdue them? What would humanity do next? Ambassador Kelrick of the Thanner species stood before the assembly and used his telepathic abilities to project images directly into the minds of every representative present. The Thanner were peaceful beings who resembled tall, slender humanoids with pale skin and large eyes. They had helped found the Council thousands of years ago and preferred diplomacy to violence. But Kelrick had reviewed the memories extracted from survivors of the battle, and what he showed the assembly made even the most warlike species feel something they had not experienced in centuries. Pure fear. The assembled representatives witnessed human soldiers fighting with weapons in both hands while using their legs to kick and their heads to strike enemies. They saw human ships executing maneuvers that killed the pilots of other species through sheer gravitational force. They felt the terror of Velkari warriors who watched humans laugh while fighting impossible odds. They experienced the final moments of crew members aboard Council ships as human boarding parties swept through corridors with violence that seemed limitless. The images ended, and the chamber sat in stunned silence. Chancellor Vex finally spoke into the quiet. He was the Council's supreme leader, a being from a species that lived for thousands of years and reproduced by splitting into new individuals who carried all the memories of their predecessor. Vex had led the Council through 3 major wars and countless minor conflicts over his 1,000-year lifespan. He had seen many species rise and fall, but nothing in his vast experience had prepared him for humanity. His solution was direct and simple. Mobilize everything. Draw forces from every member world. Strip defenses from every system. And assemble a fleet so massive that not even these terrifying humans could stand against it. What the Council did not realize was that human intelligence had been monitoring their communications for weeks. Dr. Helen Foster led a team of specialists operating from a hidden base built into a large asteroid in an uninhabited System 3 jumps from Council space. Her team had cracked the Council's communication encryption shortly after the Europa battle, and now listened to every transmission, read every message, and analyzed every strategic discussion. Earth's leaders knew the Council's plans before many Council members did. The human counteroffensive began at the Velkari homeworld. General Chris Walker commanded the invasion force from his flagship positioned in orbit above the planet. His fleet consisted of 40 warships and carried 15,000 Marines in specialized landing craft. The Velkari had prepared their defenses, expecting humanity to target their military installations in orbit. Instead, human forces struck at infrastructure on the surface. Power generation facilities went dark. Communication networks collapsed. Transportation hubs were destroyed. The attacks were precise and avoided civilian casualties, but they crippled the planet's ability to support military operations. Captain Lisa Bennett commanded one of the orbital strike vessels. Her ship carried weapons specifically designed to penetrate planetary shields and destroy hardened targets. She coordinated with ground teams who painted targets with laser designators, then fired railgun projectiles from orbit with pinpoint accuracy. Each shot took out a military command center or weapons depot, while leaving surrounding civilian structures untouched. The Velkari military tried to respond but found their communication systems jammed, and their commanders unable to coordinate defenses. Chris broadcast a message to the entire Velkari population. He spoke calmly and clearly. His words translated into the Velkari language by captured alien translation software. Humanity did not want to harm Velkari civilians. Humanity wanted justice for the unprovoked attack on the Defiant. The Velkari would surrender unconditionally and provide full intelligence about Council military capabilities. They would publicly acknowledge their attack had been wrong and unprovoked. If they refused, humanity would systematically destroy every military asset on the planet. Civilian lives would be spared, but the Velkari as a military power would cease to exist. War leader Zorenth faced an impossible choice. He was the same Velkari commander who had fled from the first battle with the Defiant. His failure had haunted him for months, and he had demanded the chance to restore his honor through victory against the humans. Now those same humans occupied the skies above his homeworld and held his entire species hostage. Surrender meant shame unlike anything Velkari culture had ever known. Resistance meant the destruction of everything his people had built over thousands of years. Zorenth chose pride over wisdom and ordered his forces to resist. Lieutenant Kevin Hayes led the Marine assault teams that deployed to the surface. His forces moved through Velkari cities using tactics that had been refined through months of training and simulation. The Marines wore powered armor that enhanced their already superior strength, and carried weapons designed specifically for fighting alien biology. They used non-lethal rounds against civilians who got in the way, but showed no mercy to Velkari military forces. The fighting was brutal but one-sided. Velkari warriors were brave, but they had never faced an enemy that moved so fast, hit so hard, and seemed to predict their every move. Human forces swept through military bases like storms. They scaled walls that the Velkari thought unclimbable. They saw in darkness that blinded alien eyes. They endured injuries that would have incapacitated any Council soldier, and kept fighting. Within 48 hours, every Velkari military installation on the planet was either destroyed or captured. Zorenth himself was taken prisoner when human commandos infiltrated his underground command bunker using routes that Velkari engineers had dismissed as impossible for any being to traverse. General Walker accepted Zorenth's surrender in person. He treated the defeated war leader with respect that confused the Velkari more than anything else about humanity. Chris explained through translators that humans understood honor in combat. They knew what it meant to fight for one's people and to face defeat. But honor also meant accepting responsibility for one's actions. The Velkari had started this conflict through unprovoked aggression. Now they would help end it by providing information that could prevent further bloodshed. Dr. Alan Price led the interrogation of captured Velkari scientists and military planners. What he learned changed everything. The Council possessed weapons far more powerful than anything they had used at Europa. Chat experimental weapons that could destabilize stars and destroy entire solar systems. The Council had not deployed these weapons because their own laws prohibited weapons of mass destruction, except in the most extreme circumstances. They had viewed humanity as a minor threat to be handled with conventional forces, but now the Council was debating whether humanity constituted an extreme enough threat to justify using their most terrible weapons. Chancellor Vex was pushing for authorization, arguing that humanity's very existence threatened the Council's authority and stability. Other species were watching to see if the Council could control this new threat. If they failed, it would encourage rebellion and chaos across the galaxy. The vote was scheduled in 2 weeks. If it passed, Earth and all human colonies would be targeted for complete destruction. Sophie Turner received her new orders with a mixture of excitement and terror. She would lead a squadron of 12 stealth ships on a mission to Nexus Prime itself. Their objective was to infiltrate the capital world of the Galactic Council, penetrate the most heavily defended planet in known space, and capture enough Council leaders to force a ceasefire before the vote could take place. It was insane to the point of impossibility, which meant it was exactly the kind of mission that human forces had proven they could accomplish. The stealth ships used technology adapted from both human and captured alien systems. They could fool most sensors and slip past orbital defenses if flown with perfect precision. Sophie and her pilots trained for 2 weeks, memorizing approach vectors and timing their movements to coincide with gaps in the defense grid. Kevin Hayes would lead the ground team once they reached the surface. His commandos numbered only 24, but they had trained for this specific mission until they could execute it blindfolded. The journey to Nexus Prime took 8 days at maximum speed. Sophie's squadron approached the capital world using a commercial shipping lane, hiding among the constant traffic of freighters and passenger vessels. The Council's sensors swept past them multiple times, but the stealth systems held. They reached orbital insertion, altitude, and deployed their assault craft under cover of a scheduled meteor shower that provided sensor interference. Kevin's team hit the surface in 6 different locations around the capital city. They moved through the streets wearing clothing stolen from various alien species, blending into the diverse population that made Nexus Prime a true melting pot of galactic civilization. The commandos spoke multiple alien languages thanks to months of study, and used forged identification that human intelligence had crafted from captured Council databases. They looked alien enough in their disguises that most citizens ignored them. Chancellor Vex's private residence sat in the most secure district of the capital. It was protected by multiple layers of security, including armed guards, sensor grids, and automated defense systems. Kevin's team studied the security for 3 hours before making their move. They used electronic warfare to blind sensors, social engineering to bypass checkpoints, and when necessary, direct violence to eliminate guards. Within 20 minutes, they stood in Vex's private chambers facing the ancient leader of the Galactic Council. Vex had survived assassination attempts and coups during his long life. He remained calm even with human weapons pointed at him. Kevin explained the situation clearly. Humanity wanted peace but would accept continued war if necessary. Chancellor Vex and 6 other senior council members would come with the humans as insurance against further attacks. They would be treated well and released unharmed once negotiations began. Resistance would be met with force, but cooperation would be rewarded with dignity. Vex considered his options and chose wisdom over pride. He came peacefully. The escape from Nexus Prime became a legend told on both human and alien worlds for generations. Sophie's squadron evaded planetary defenses, jumped to faster than light speed with seconds to spare, and delivered their prisoners to a neutral location where President Nicole Hayes waited to address the galaxy. The message Nicole broadcast shocked every species in known space. Humanity had struck at the heart of the Council's power, proven they could reach anyone anywhere, and done it without killing a single civilian. The humans wanted peace, but clearly possessed the ability to wage war on terms that terrified even the mighty Council. Chancellor Vex sat in what humans called a conference room aboard a neutral station at the edge of Council space. The ancient leader had survived assassination attempts, political coups, and 3 major wars during his 1,000-year existence. But he had never felt as uncertain as he did now, facing President Nicole Hayes across a simple table. The humans had proven they could strike anywhere at any time against any target. They had captured him from his own bedroom in the most secure location in the galaxy. They had done it without harming civilians and then released him unharmed as promised. It was a demonstration of power mixed with restraint that confused and frightened council members more than pure violence would have. The peace negotiations had been ongoing for 6 weeks. Both sides maintained a ceasefire, but the tension remained thick enough to cut. The council wanted assurances that humanity would respect galactic law and join their government as a member species. Humanity wanted recognition as a sovereign power with the right to defend itself and explore space without interference. Neither side was willing to accept the other's terms without significant concessions. Nicole led the human delegation with quiet determination, flanked by General Chris Walker and Dr. Alan Price. Across from them sat Vex and representatives from the Council's most powerful species. Ambassador Kelrick of the Thanner spoke first, his telepathic voice touching every mind in the room with careful precision. The Council acknowledged that their initial attack on the Defiant had been unjustified and wrong. The Velkari had acted without proper authorization, treating first contact as a military engagement rather than a diplomatic opportunity. For this mistake, The council offered formal apologies and substantial reparations to the families of humans who died in that first battle. Kelrick's mental voice carried genuine regret, and the humans felt his sincerity through the telepathic connection. But Kelrick continued with concerns that could not be ignored. Humanity's military capabilities were unlike anything in known space. Their willingness to sacrifice themselves in battle bordered on behavior that most species considered insane. Their weapons were designed with a lethality that suggested a species that had spent its entire existence perfecting the art of killing. How could the Council trust that humans would not become conquerors themselves once they grew strong enough? What would stop humanity from doing to other species what the Council had tried to do to them? Dr. Helen Foster responded with a presentation that had taken weeks to prepare. She showed the Council representatives the complete history of humanity displayed through images, videos, and data that left nothing hidden. The wars that had killed millions, the genocides that had nearly destroyed entire populations, the nuclear weapons that had brought humanity to the edge of extinction, the environmental destruction that had almost made Earth uninhabitable. But she also showed the art, the music, the philosophy, and the gradual painful progress toward peace that humanity had achieved over thousands of years. Helen explained that humans were not violent because they enjoyed destruction. They were survivors of a death world that had forced them to be strong or die. Earth's heavy gravity had made them physically powerful. Its diseases had forged immune systems that could resist almost anything. Its predators had taught them to be clever and adaptable. Its long history of warfare had taught them every lesson about combat that could be learned. But that same history had also taught them the value of peace and the terrible cost of war. Captain Jake Morrison spoke next, invited to share his perspective as the human who had experienced first contact. He described standing on the bridge of the Defiant when the Velkari ships appeared. He talked about the hope he had felt at finally meeting other intelligent life. He remembered the exact moment when that hope turned to horror, as alien weapons tore into his ship without warning or explanation. He spoke about the 14 crew members who died that day, and how their faces haunted his dreams. His voice cracked with emotion as he explained how he had been forced to order his people to kill beings they had hoped to befriend. But Jake also talked about the Velkari warriors he had faced. He described their courage in battle and their dedication to their people. He spoke about war leader Zrenth, and how the Velkari commander had chosen to surrender rather than see his homeworld destroyed. Jake explained that he held no hatred for the Velkari or any council species. They had been following orders and doing what they thought was right. The real problem was a system that assumed any unknown species must be conquered or controlled, rather than approached with open minds and peaceful intentions. Lieutenant Kevin Hayes spoke last from the human side. His testimony shocked everyone in the room more than anything else that had been said. Kevin admitted that he had nightmares about the aliens he had killed. He described the faces of Velkari warriors he had fought hand-to-hand aboard the Defiant. He talked about the terror he saw in their eyes as they realized they were dying. He explained that every human soldier carried psychological scars from violence, that humanity did not celebrate killing, that their warriors suffered from trauma that required years of treatment and support. Kevin's voice shook as he told the council that he wished the first battle had never happened. He wished the Velkari had talked instead of shooting. He wished he could take back every life he had taken, even though he knew those kills had been necessary to protect his crew. His pain was visible and genuine. Here was a soldier who had been devastatingly effective in combat, yet who clearly hated the necessity of violence. It was completely unlike the proud warrior cultures that dominated council military forces, where soldiers celebrated their victories and sought glory in battle. The testimony created a long silence in the conference room. Chancellor Vex had led the council for centuries and thought he understood all the species in the galaxy. But humans were different in ways that challenged everything he believed he knew. They were capable of extreme violence but suffered from using it. They could fight with terrifying effectiveness but preferred peace. They could kill without hesitation when necessary, but mourned every death, including their enemies. It was a contradiction that made sense only when viewed through the lens of their unique history. Vex made a decision that would reshape galactic politics for generations. He proposed a new framework that recognized humanity as a fully sovereign species with all rights to self-defense and territorial expansion. Humans would not be required to join the council as subjects. Instead, they would be recognized as independent allies. In exchange, humanity would share their tactical and strategic knowledge to help the Council defend against threats that their civilized warfare had proven ineffective against. Because Vex now admitted what few Council members wanted to acknowledge, the galaxy was not as safe as they pretended. The truth was that the Council faced dangers from unexplored space. There were species out there that did not follow civilized rules. Pirates who raided colony worlds, slavers who captured entire populations, ancient threats that Council forces had tried to fight and failed against. The Council's military doctrine worked well against other civilized species who followed the same rules. But against enemies who fought like humans with desperation and creativity, and willingness to sacrifice everything for victory, the Council had no effective response. They needed allies who understood that kind of warfare because they had perfected it. President Nicole Hayes considered the proposal carefully. She consulted with her advisors and with the families of those who had died in the war. The debate on Earth lasted for weeks as humanity wrestled with the question of whether they wanted to be the galaxy's soldiers. Some argued that helping the Council would lead to endless conflicts. Others believed that refusing would leave humanity isolated and vulnerable. Eventually, Nicole made her decision. Humanity would accept the proposal, but with strict conditions. Humans would serve as military advisors and allies, not as mercenaries or attack dogs. Earth and all human colonies would remain completely independent, with no Council oversight or interference. Humans would be free to explore and settle any unclaimed worlds they chose. Most importantly, the Council would establish new first contact protocols to ensure no other species suffered what humanity had endured. Every new species would be approached with diplomacy and respect, unless they proved themselves hostile. Beyond any doubt, the Treaty of New Horizons was signed, on a neutral station exactly 1 year after the Defiant's first encounter with the Velkari. Representatives from every Council species attended along with human delegates from Earth and the new colonies. Sophie Turner flew her ship in the ceremonial honor guard, thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. Kevin Hayes stood among the human honor guard, wearing a uniform decorated with medals that felt heavy with the weight of what they represented. General Chris Walker became humanity's first ambassador general to the Council, a position created specifically to bridge the gap between human and alien thinking. Dr. Helen Foster took command of the military advisory program, where she would teach Council forces the lessons humanity had learned through centuries of warfare. Dr. Alan Price established the Joint Research Initiative, where human and alien scientists would work together to advance technology for the benefit of all species. On Earth, billions of people celebrated the peace while mourning those who had died to achieve it. Families visited memorials dedicated to the fallen. Veterans gathered to remember friends who would never come home. Admiral Frank Carter had died at Europa, but his sacrifice had bought humanity the time needed to prove their worth. His name joined thousands of others on the wall of remembrance that would stand forever as a reminder of the price of survival. War leaders Renth watched the treaty signing from the Velkari homeworld with emotions he could not fully process. His species had started this conflict through arrogance and paid terribly for that mistake. Velkari military power had been shattered. Their reputation as warriors had been destroyed. But in defeat, they had learned something that centuries of victory had never taught them. The humans who had defeated them so completely had also helped rebuild their infrastructure, shared medical technology, and treated them with respect rather than cruelty. Perhaps there was more to strength than the ability to dominate others. Chancellor Vex reviewed reports from the first Joint Human Council military operations in his private chambers. Human tactical doctrine was already showing results. Species that had struggled for years against pirates and raiders were now winning decisive victories using strategies that humans had developed. The key was that humans fought smart rather than just fighting hard. They used psychology, deception, and environmental advantages rather than relying only on superior technology and numbers. Council forces were learning to think like humans, and it was making them far more effective. But Vex also worried about the future. Humanity was still young and still learning their place in the larger galaxy. Their potential for both good and terrible harm was immense. The Council had started their relationship through violence, and while peace had been achieved, real trust would take generations to build. Vex had made the right choice in ending the war, But whether it would lead to lasting cooperation or eventual conflict remained uncertain. Only time would tell if humanity would be the galaxy's greatest allies or its most dangerous enemy. President Nicole Hayes gave her final speech on the Treaty from Earth, transmitted to every human settlement and every council world. She spoke of hope for the future and cooperation between species. She acknowledged the challenges ahead and promised that humanity would work to be good neighbors. But she also reminded everyone, human and alien alike, that humanity would never again be caught unprepared. The fleet would remain strong. The soldiers would stay trained. The weapons would be ready. Because humanity had learned the hardest lesson the galaxy could teach. Peace was precious but fragile, and those who could not defend themselves would always be at the mercy of those who could.